Okay, so the question is that the totalitarian forms that we've seen primarily in the past have been male, but maybe we're seeing something different now. I really don't think it's different. I think it's of a common kind that's expanded in its dominion. So you imagine that there's an essential feminine pathology, just as there is an essential masculine pathology. And the essential feminine pathology Freud mapped out. It's the Oedipal mother. And the Oedipal mother is the mother that gets too close to her children, right? And intermingles herself with them to too great a degree, that in her attempts to protect them undermines them fatally. And so there's a classic representation of the feminine in the West, and the classic representation is Mary. And here's one of the representations. It's lovely, and it's derived at least in part from the story of Mary and the snake in the Garden of Eden. And so Mary has her foot on a serpent, and she's holding Christ off to the side like this. Well, that's exactly what mothers have always done. It's a biological portrait of human women, is they hold their infants out of the reach of the terrible serpentine predator. Obviously, that's what we do. Well, that's fine, but adults aren't infants, and neither are children. And if you treat them like they are, you undermine them. You pathologize them. You turn them into old infants. That's an ugly thing. And that's the Freudian nightmare. You know, and this happens in therapy very frequently. I mean, you can be tangled into a terrible relationship with your father. That's often either because he was absent, abusive, or tyrannical, something like that. But the standard pathology with mom is she did everything for you. Well, what's left for you to do? Nothing, including never leaving. Right. And that's the motivation, you know, for the woman who's nothing but protective mother. There's no role outside of nurturant of nurturer of infants. Well, you just keep them infants. They'll never leave. They might kill you one night in your sleep, but they'll never leave.
Can you connect that to what we're seeing in terms of identity?
Sure, sure. I mean, it's so comical watching the feminists, postmodernists in particular, rattle on about the absence of gender reality and act out the archetypal devouring mother at exactly the same time. For them, the world is divided into predators and infants. And the predators are evil and need to be stopped, and the infants need to be cared for. Well, that's what the mother does. But adults are not infants. And all you do is destroy them when you treat them that way, especially when they're adolescents and just starting to develop. You know, there's a rule that I attempted to abide by when I had small children, and the rule was, don't do anything for your children that they can do themselves. And that's annoying, that rule, because it takes you like 15 seconds to dress a 2-year-old, but if you let the 2-year-old dress himself, it's 15 minutes, or 20 minutes, or half an hour. You chase them around the house. But if you let them learn to dress themselves, then you don't have to dress them anymore, and they can do it. And you do that with setting the table, and you do that with everything. It's like, no, it's okay, you do that now. Well, I care for you so much, let me do that for you. It's like, I don't care for you at all when I say that. I don't care for you at all. I'm going to stop doing everything I possibly can for you as rapidly as I possibly can. Say, well, that's great. That's how you work in an old age home. Do not do anything for the inhabitants that they can do themselves, because you rob them of the last vestiges of their independence, right? It's what you do when you're a manager. If you're a good manager, you make yourself superfluous by extending autonomy and independence to the people that you manage so that they can take over the whole job. You don't do that by doing everything for people. And you certainly don't do that by dividing the world archetypally and uncritically into predators, those who have more, and victims, infants, those who have nothing, and acting like all you can ever do is protect them. You don't protect, first of all, you can't protect people. You can only make them strong. That's it. You cannot protect them. You can make them strong, and then they can protect themselves. But then they don't need you. Right, and there's the underground pathological element of the devouring mother. It's like, never leave me. Here's the deal. I'll do everything for you. You just never leave. Right. That's sleeping with your mother. Right. That's the Freudian nightmare. Right. You don't invite your child into your bed. Right. You distinguish between them and you. You distinguish between them and your husband. And you facilitate their independence. A part of the reason why it's useful to have a mother and a father is because the mother has to fall insanely in love with the infant or she'd throw it out the window, right? Because they're insanely demanding and they're always right, right? Because the right way to treat an infant, especially before 9 months, is I'll do everything for you and you're always right and your needs take priority over everyone else's, and anybody that threatens you is terrible. Exactly right. But after, once the kid is ambulatory and starting to be independent, that's the wrong attitude. The attitude then is, get the hell on with it. And men who are less prone to negative emotion and less compassionate are much better at fostering that kind of independence. And so it's usually then when they step into the family and start playing with the kids, rough and tumble play, and pushing them forward and saying, get on with it, you can do it, you can do it. And it's very hard for a mother to play both those roles because she has to fall so in love with her infant that it's difficult for her to be like universal caregiver and disciplinarian at the same time. Because the roles run contrary to one another. And so now women have entered the political sphere, right, en masse. And so they're going to bring their essential nature with them, all the while saying there's no such thing as essential nature. It's like, yeah, there is. Success breeds success, and failure breeds failure, and it's not necessarily linear. And that's a really difficult thing to deal with. And it's hard on societies because one of the things we do know is that, as you stretch out the inequality, you make men, particularly on the lower end of the distribution, more and more likely to be aggressive. It's sort of like, you imagine every man has a threshold for violence, and status is important to men. Not that it's not important to women, but it's a different kind of status. Status is important to men because it's one of the things that makes them marketable as partners to women. So it actually turns out to be quite important to men. The men tend to compete with one another for status, hierarchy position. And in a really unequal society, if you're like a low rung guy, then, and you don't have any opportunity to rise because the society isn't structured so that there's mobility, then the more aggressive guys tend to turn to criminality. And and so you could say there's a threshold for criminality, and the more inequality pressure you put on a particular area, geographic or political area, the more inequality pressure you put on it, the more men slip past that threshold and into criminality. It's not like money is necessarily a good for everyone. It's hard to manage money. It's really easy for it to disappear. I mean, elderly people have a hell of a time now because, crooks are contacting them on the internet non-stop. And so just giving people money is like, it's like pouring water in their hands. It's not that helpful, not necessarily that helpful. And then, of course, contributors to poverty are, well, it's not so good to have a low IQ. People don't like the idea of IQ because it seems so arbitrary. You have a high IQ. Well, it's not like you deserve it exactly. You're set up that way pretty much right from the beginning. It's very, 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 very stable. You can make a high IQ person stupider by, not educating them up to the level of their possibility, but taking someone who has a low IQ and trying to raise that, it's like, if you can figure out how to do that, well, it's Nobel Prize time for you, because people have tried that a lot, and most recently with those, lumosity games and that sort of thing, and the evidence that those produce anything other than brilliant performances on the lumosity game itself is basically zero. My dad used to take the dog for a walk, and then the cat got lonesome, and so it started to follow him. And first of all, it would just go along the buildings, the houses on their route, hiding really from predators. And after a while I got kind of comfortable with that, and then it would follow right behind the dog. But it had a border, and if my dad took the dog over one street too many for the cat would just sit on the corner and cry like a cat cries. It was like, that's it for me, man. I'm not going any farther out into the unknown. And so the distinction between the territory that you have mastered and the territory that you haven't mastered is a fundamental distinction. It's the distinction between home and the strange land. And the thing about familiar territory for people is that most of the familiar territory that we inhabit is other people, because we're so social. So you can't really think, it's a weird way of thinking about territory. It's not exactly geographical, objective territory. It's territory with a dominance hierarchy in it. And the dominance hierarchy has a predictable structure, and you know where you fit in it most of the time, and so that when you act out in that territory surrounded by your people, then often you get what you want, and you're so thrilled about that because you just don't want someone acting erratically around you, and you know that. So you walk down Bloor and there's people there that should really be institutionalized, but we deinstitutionalized them all so they could be free, and free to be, you know, suffering and malfunctioning out on the street. That's what the freedom ended up being. But you know, you'll walk by someone like that who's muttering away to the voices in his head, and you know, maybe striking out against whatever it is that's plaguing him, and you won't make eye contact. You might even go across the street. You're certainly going to give him a wide berth. You're going to keep a distance between him and you, and you're going to hope that you don't attract his attention because he's not in the dominance hierarchy and you don't know what the hell he might do. And that's unexplored territory too. That's another way of thinking about it. Like, we inhabit time and space, not just space and not just time. We inhabit time and space, and our territories are spatial temporal. We're here now, and this is safe now. And it's safe partly because of the physical structure and it's working, but it's also safe because none of you are manifesting peculiar behavior. But if you started to manifest peculiar behavior, if you stood up and started muttering or yelling or maybe attacking someone next to you, all the rest of you would freeze first, because then all of a sudden this would be unexplored territory. The match between what you want, which is a peaceful lecture that you hope has some content, the match between what you want and what's happening has vanished. And so then you don't know where you are. And so then what do you do when you don't know where you are? What do you do when you don't know what to do? Well, if you're a computer, you just crash. But you know, what good is that to you? You're just going to die? That isn't helpful. You freeze first, and then maybe you cautiously attend, or maybe you don't. Maybe you just keep your damn eyes averted and you sit there and you hope that no one notices you. That's a prey response, right? That's like a rabbit frozen when it thinks a fox is looking at it. And we were prey animals for a long time. There was a cat that they recently discovered, a prehistoric cat that had this bottom single tooth, and they found out that a human skull fit right inside its mouth, and so it could grab you here and pierce the back of your skull with its single tooth, and that's what it was evolved for. So, you know, it's under such conditions we evolved, and we're predators obviously, but we're tasty predators, and so other things were perfectly happy to eat us. And so when you're where you don't know what to do, you act like a prey animal. And that's probably what you should do, because maybe if you keep your head down and shut the hell up, there won't be any attention attracted to you, and maybe you'll get through it. You know, you might decide, unlikely, to intervene and take the guy down, but you would be the exception rather than the norm, and it's unsurprising. Okay, so what I came to understand was that belief systems regulated emotions, but not exactly psychologically. Like, it isn't exactly, and this is sort of like the terror management theories, it's not exactly like you have a theory in your head and the theory explains the world, and because the theory explains the world, the theory is what's making you secure. It's kind of like that. It's like you have a theory in your head, and the theory makes you feel secure because it explains the world, but the reason it explains the world is because other people have the same theory in their head, and then when you both act out the theory, you both get what you want. And it's the coming together of the theory and the outcome that makes you, it's life. Not only does it stop you from being anxious and often make you happy because you get what you want, but it's not just psychological, you know, the fact that we do this, that we cooperate within our societies, we match our belief systems and then act them out, that's the predicate for a productive society. So it's actually, it isn't just that it saves you from death anxiety like the terror management theorists have it, it saves you from death. And that's good. I mean, being protected from death anxiety, yeah, good, that's great too, man. But actually not dying, that's sort of the fundamental thing that you're after. And so people have reason to defend their territory, if you think of territory that way, as you think about it as a domain where the fundamental presuppositions of each citizen are matched by the behavior of their co-citizens. They have every reason to defend that. And if it falls apart, it can have mortally serious consequences. It's chaos, you know, and that chaos doesn't just destabilize everybody psychologically, it destabilizes everything. It can destabilize the currency, it can destabilize the industrial economy, the lights can go off, it's like, it's not good. So, hey, no wonder people protect it. So then I started thinking about what a belief system was. And I realized that a belief system was actually a set of moral guidelines. And moral guidelines are guidelines about how you should behave. Also how you should perceive. And the reason that a moral guideline is necessary for you to perceive is that you can't look at anything without a hierarchy of value, right? Think about it, like how many things in this room could you look at? There's innumerable things in this room to look at. There's just all this squares, the little tiny squares in this fabric. You could look at those things for till the end of time, one at a time, but you don't do that. In fact, if I took most of you out of this room, there's a very low probability that you'd be able to tell me what color the walls were, or even if those things were on the walls. And the reason for that is that who cares? As long as the walls don't move, color is irrelevant, and there's no reason for you to remember it. It has no emotional significance. It has no value. And so what you do instead is, well, this is what you're doing. So why are you here? I don't mean in the broad metaphysical sense. I mean specifically, why are you here right now? And I would say, well, you're students, obviously, and you're trying to get a degree, and you know, you believe that that will have some functional utility. Maybe you'll be a little wiser and a little more literate and be able to think a little better and be able to write a little better, and so you'll actually be more functional in the world. That would be good, you know, and maybe you're interested. But anyways, you're in this particular lecture so that you can take this particular class, so that you can get a particular kind of degree, so that you can launch your life. And then in your life you're probably going to meet someone that you have a long-term relationship with, and you're going to have children, and you're going to partake in this society, and that's why you're here. All of those reasons simultaneously is why you're here. And so then that helps you decide what to look at. And so what you look at is, at the moment, or listen to, is me, because in principle I'm the gateway to that set of accomplishments at this moment. And so you focus on me, and that's because you value that. And so what that means is you can't even look at the world without a value structure. You know, it's chaos if everything is equally unimportant, or if everything is equally important. You know, I worked for a UN committee at one point, and the UN committee had like 100 proposals for how the world could be improved, but there was no order to them. It's like, it wasn't, you know, this was more important than this. It's like, well, that's the end of that. You know, you got to start with something, and so that means you have to make something more important than other things, obviously, in your life. If everything's of equal importance, then you're paralyzed. Now, you know, it's a truism, and probably an oversimplified one, that since the dawn of the scientific revolution, a wedge has been driven through the heart of our society such that the moral systems that we use to unite us, so those would be religious systems fundamentally, have been subject to an intense critique from the scientists. And you know, it's a pretty effective critique. Even if you've maintained a traditional faith, it's like, you know, the scientific onslaught is no joke. And that's a problem as far as I can tell, because, and the problem is that you're still left with the problem of how you should act. The more disruption, the more destabilized you're going to be, which is why if someone tells you that you're going to perish painfully in 3 months, it's like, that's a bad one. You're really in an unexpected territory. There, nothing that you assumed that was real, roughly speaking, in the world is real anymore. We like to watch people in their normal life blindsided by something, experiencing this interregnum of chaos where they explore and gather new information and retool their character or retool the world, because either of those would work as a solution, and then come out the other side and things are better than they were to begin with, or at least as good. But better is better. That's a happy ending, right? That's a happy ending. That's a comedy, technically speaking. And so what you want your life to be a comedy. Not that it's supposed to be funny, because comedy doesn't have to be funny, technically speaking. It's just the opposite of tragedy. Tragedy is when you're going along pretty well and you get blindsided, and that's that. And you know, that can certainly happen. It happens to people all the time. But it's a comedy you want. So, here we are at the big event, and Pinocchio's off to be a celebrity. And the cricket is watching. And Pinocchio basically, well, he's got some natural talent, because he's a puppet and he doesn't have strings, and he goes on stage and with strings, and then he drops his strings and the whole crowd is amazed. And the crowd should be amazed when that happens, right? You can imagine when a kid goes to school and shows some independence, that's actually going to, people are going to notice that. His peers are going to notice that, the teachers are going to notice that. Maybe it's too much independence even, right? But it's still it is a remarkable thing too. Like, it's so interesting, you know, you can see marked signs of independence in children, well, right from the time they're born, basically, because what's one of the things that's really funny about infants is that, you know, when they're crying, you always think, oh, the baby's, well, you're crying, the baby's sad. It's like, no, a lot of the time that baby is angry. And the way that we know that is because you could do facial expression coding on infants, just like on adults, and you can tell what emotion they're expressing. And very frequently, like when the kid starts to recognize his mom explicitly, because he or she knows the smell right away, pretty much in the sound of the voice, but visually, if someone who comes in and it isn't who the baby wants, so generally it isn't mom, the baby will start to cry. But it's not because the baby's sad, generally, it's because it's angry that mom didn't show up. And that's an early sign of will. It's like this kid wants things, like, and it's perfectly willing to tell you about that. And of course, a 2-year-old who's having a temper tantrum is in some sense doing the same thing. It's poorly integrated will and independence, obviously, but it certainly runs contrary to what you want. You don't want your 2-year-old having a temper tantrum in the middle of the toy store. It's extraordinarily embarrassing for you and, well, for you, but it's also embarrassing for the 2-year-old. This is one of the reasons I think that sort of thing should be carefully socialized rapidly, because it's actually humiliating for the kid, because other people don't like that, and they're very judgmental about, like, they won't say anything usually, but sometimes they will, but they're not happy about the fact that that's happening, and they will judge the child negatively. And so you don't want your child to be behaving in a way in public that makes other people think badly of them. It's really not good. And so part of your job as a parent is to not expose your child to that sort of experience, especially not repeatedly. It's really hard on them. Or they get narcissistic, which is also really hard on them. It takes a lot longer to manifest itself. So anyways, he's off on stage and Stromboli introduces him and talks about how wonderful this is going to be, and Pinocchio comes out on stage with his strings on and drops them, and then he falls down the steps and put his nose in a hole, makes a fool out of himself. And that's when Stromboli, the first time Stromboli shows his true character, because he just really yells and screams at him. And he has his back to the audience, Stromboli, while he's doing this, so he's not noticing how the audience is reacting. Typical tyrannical parent, right, who's not noticing that society is reacting a different way than him, and he's not happy about it. And Pinocchio, of course, is dazed and feels like a fool, and he is a fool, so that's appropriate. But then Stromboli hears the crowd laughing, and as soon as he turns around, he's like all smiles again. And so that's the first time you get insight into what sort of puppet master he is. He's there to please the crowd, and that's all. And he's there to look good in public, but fundamentally he's a tyrant. And so, and I guess that's the problem with false celebrity, is that the negative spirit of the crowd becomes your master, right? Because to be a celebrity, you have to be a crowd pleaser. And if you're pleasing the kind of crowd who likes a celebrity like you, and there's not much reason for that, then it's not exactly like you're appealing to the proper side of the crowd, and you've become its puppet one way or another. And maybe it's rewarding you with wealth, perhaps, and with attention, but fundamentally, it's not something I would recommend if you want to stay reasonably psychologically healthy for any reasonable amount of time. You're going to sell yourself out. And I don't mean that in any casual way, you know. All right, so anyways, Stromboli changes from the tyrant to the good father in half a second. He gives Pinocchio a pat on the head, despite the fact that he's made a mistake, looks all kind, and the show continues. Now, the cricket is not very happy about this. He's sitting in the stage watching. He's very angry and, let's say, disgusted by what's happening, partly because Pinocchio is making a fool of himself. Now, that's an interesting thing, you know. Human beings blush. In fact, if I remember correctly, the name Adam, you know, like Adam and Eve, is related to the capacity to blush. Now, that comes from something I read a long time ago, and that might be wrong, but Adam does manifest shame in the sight of God, so there is a relationship there. But anyways, people do make fools of themselves for public display, and you can tell you've done that in some sense, not always, if you blush, because you've either said something you shouldn't have, and you know, you realize that, which is more like you've tried to be funny and gone a little bit too far, and sometimes that can be really funny. Or you've said something that you know to be false, manipulative, deceitful, beneath you, any of those things, and you'll have an automatic response to it. You'll be ashamed and blush. And one theory about that is that you can trust people who blush. And so, because you know that their conscience will betray them. And so that even if they are lying, they tell you. And so it's an interesting theory, you know, because blush is definitely, like, it's a facial display, you know, it's right out there where people can see it. So, you know, maybe that's true, maybe it isn't, but it's kind of an interesting idea. Anyways, the cricket is not happy with what's going on. He's not happy about Stromboli, and he's not happy about the willingness of Pinocchio to make a fool of himself to support this false celebrity. And so I actually think that's why the celebrity types like that often get narcissistic and arrogant. You know, it's because they aren't paying attention. They're not paying attention really to what's happening inside of them. They drown it out because the glory and the money and all that is so attractive and enticing. They don't notice, they refuse to notice what price they're paying for it, and they magnify up their grandiosity and their arrogance to keep that stuff all under control. And then, of course, they get surrounded by sycophants, which is a really bad thing, right? They get surrounded by people who will tell them exactly what they want to hear. And that's really bad if what you want to hear from other people is not good for you. To surround yourself with people who won't offer you genuine criticism or even genuine reward. It's the same thing. Like, you want from me that I differentially reward and punish you in approximately the way that the good part of the crowd will. That's what you want from all your friends. Because then your interactions with them can generalize out to the broader community in a productive way. And so a good friend, you know, I mean, your friends tend to be on the supportive side, and perhaps that's appropriate, assuming there's reciprocity. But a good friend will also tell you when, one way or another, when your behavior is starting to tilt in a direction that's going to make you unpopular with them and likely unpopular with other people. And of course, that's what a parent is supposed to, that's the prime job of a parent in my estimation. It's like, don't do that. Other people will hurt you if you do that. By exclusion, by threat, by failure to offer you an opportunity, bad things will happen to you. So you can't do that. And then you're a representative of the social situation, which is exactly what you should be, not a friend. So